What kind of woman runs toward gunfire instead of away from it? What kind of heart chooses compassion over survival in a land where mercy can get you killed? In the Arizona Territory of 1882, that woman was Rebecca Mayfield, and the choice she made on one violent afternoon would change her life forever. The gunshot that tore across the Dragoon Mountains wasn't what froze Rebecca to her core, it was the silence that came after. A heavy, watchful silence that felt older than the land itself. She stood on the porch of her isolated homestead, a harness in her hands, the smell of leather and linseed oil rising like a small comfort. Then she heard it. A frantic crack of rifles, sharp and chaotic, echoing across the dry chaparral. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't hunting. This was pursuit. The sky hung low and bruised, the air thick with the promise of a summer storm. Rebecca's blue eyes scanned the jagged spine of the mountains until she saw them, 6 riders cutting hard across the land. A posy. And they were hunting something. Moments later, she saw the lone figure they were chasing, an Apache warrior, barely hanging onto his horse. He rode low, swaying, his left arm limp at his side, a dark stain spreading across his deerskin shirt. He wasn't charging toward her cabin with a war cry. He was fleeing for his life. Rebecca's breath caught. Every story she had heard, every fear she carried, screamed at her to get inside. She rushed through her door, grabbed her Winchester, and rested the barrel on the windowsill. Her fingers tightened, ready to do what everyone on the frontier was trained to do. Shoot first. Survive. But something in her refused. The scene unfolding in front of her didn't match the stories of savage raiders she'd been told. This young man wasn't attacking. He was being hunted like an animal. The riders gained ground. One shot cracked again. The Apache's horse screamed and collapsed, pitching him violently into the dust. He staggered up, pulled a knife with his good hand and planted his feet. A wounded boy standing alone against armed men. It was suicide. Then Rebecca recognized the man leading the chase, Silas Kane, the ruthless cattle baron who ruled the territory with threats and blood. A man who believed the only answer to the Apache was extermination. His pale eyes burned with a cruel kind of joy. The warrior braced for death. Rebecca felt something shift inside her, a deep trembling in her chest. She saw Thomas, her husband, fighting fever with that same stubborn refusal to give up. She saw herself, fighting loneliness and the land. She saw more than a stranger. She saw a human being. Her hand fell from the rifle. Her heart raced with terror and clarity. Before she could think, before she could talk herself out of it, Rebecca ran out her door. She sprinted straight toward the wounded warrior. "Get down!" she shouted, pointing wildly toward the root cellar beside her cabin. He stared at her, confused, caught between pain and disbelief. The language between them was a canyon wide, but desperation bridged it. The riders were only seconds away. Rebecca grabbed his good arm and pulled. The contact jolted them both, the heat of his skin, the tremble of shock in his muscles, but she didn't stop. Half dragging and half guiding him, she shoved him toward the cellar. He hesitated for only a heartbeat before climbing down. As soon as his head vanished into the darkness, she slammed the doors shut and threw the heavy wooden bar across them. She scattered dirt and straw over the seams with frantic movements. By the time she spun around, the riders thundered into her yard. Silas Kane reined in his horse, towering over her like a shadow carved from hate. "You see an Apache come through here?" he barked. "Wounded. Running like the devil." Rebecca's breath came quick and shallow. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the men could hear it. She placed a hand on her chest and let herself tremble. Fear wasn't hard to fake. It was already crawling through her bones. "I heard the shots," she whispered. "He ran east, toward the rocks." Kane's pale eyes swept the homestead, the cabin, the shed, the corral. And then, her heart seized, the cellar doors, covered in fresh straw. He dismounted. His boots hit the ground with a heavy thud. He walked slowly toward her, close enough that she could smell whiskey and sweat on his breath. "You sure about that?" he said, voice low and dangerous. She didn't blink. She forced her jaw to stay steady. Her entire world shrank to the space between her and the cellar doors behind her. "I'm sure," she said. 2 riders tore apart her shed and garden. Another kicked open her chicken coop. Cain stared into her eyes, searching for any crack in her resolve. "You live alone, Mrs. Mayfield," he said. "Be a shame if folks started thinking you were friendly to savages." His meaning was clear as a rattlesnake's warning. Then he turned toward her cabin. To get there, he would walk directly over the hidden warrior. Rebecca stepped in front of him. She planted her feet. Her voice shook, but she didn't move. "Mr. Cain," she said, "you are not welcome in my home." For a moment the world held its breath. The wind stilled. The storm clouds hovered. Cain stared at her, stunned that a lone widow dared defy him again. He looked down at the ground near her feet, at the cellar doors. A flicker of suspicion crossed his face. For one terrible heartbeat, Rebecca thought it was over. Then Cain growled in disgust. "Fine," he spat, "but if I find out you lied, I'll burn this place with you in it." He mounted his horse, shouting to his men. They galloped east, chasing a ghost. Rebecca stood trembling as the riders disappeared into the distance. Only when their silhouettes vanished into the bruised sky did she finally breathe again. The storm broke over her homestead, rain falling in sheets. She leaned against the cabin wall, shaking so hard she could barely stand. She had lied to Silas Cain. She had saved a wounded Apache boy. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. And somewhere in the darkness beneath her feet, a life she had just risked everything for, waited in silence. Rebecca waited until the pounding rain steadied into a dull roar before she dared to lift the cellar doors. Her hands shook as she pulled away the wet straw and struggled with the heavy crossbar. When the doors finally creaked open, a wave of cold, damp air rose from the darkness. "It's safe," she whispered into the blackness. "They're gone." There was no answer. Fear stabbed through her. She grabbed a lantern, lit it, and climbed down the ladder. The warm glow pushed back the shadows and revealed the wounded Apache slumped against the wall. His breathing was shallow. His face was pale beneath his copper skin. Blood soaked the front of his shirt. He was still alive, but barely. Rebecca knelt near him and raised both hands so he could see she meant no harm. He watched her with dark, wary eyes, his hand resting weakly on the hilt of his knife. He was ready to defend himself, even in this state. "I want to help you," she said softly, touching her chest. "Help." He didn't understand the words, but her tone reached him in a way language couldn't. His hand slowly fell away from the knife. It was the first thread of trust. Rebecca moved slowly, carefully cutting away the shirt from his wound. Blood had dried thick on his shoulder, and when she pressed a cloth soaked in warm water to clean it, he tensed with pain but made no sound. His strength stunned her. She had seen grown ranchers cry out over far smaller injuries. "You're brave," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Too brave for your own good." Once the wound was clean, she stitched it closed with the steady hands her husband had once taught her. Her voice stayed low, comforting, as she worked. "My Thomas told me panic is a luxury," she murmured. "So we stay steady. That's how we survive." The warrior watched her with tired eyes. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the gentleness behind them. When she finished, she wrapped his shoulder tightly. His body relaxed as the worst of the pain eased. Rebecca brought him stew and water, and though weak, he ate until the bowl was empty. The storm raged above them, but down in the cellar, something calm began to take shape. A fragile truce. A strange safety. 3 days passed like that. Rebecca spent her days above, tending to chores through sheets of rain, always watching the horizon for riders. Each night she returned to the cellar to care for him. She changed his bandage, fed him warm food, and cooled his fever with wet cloths. On the second night, the fever struck hard. His body shook. His voice broke into delirious cries of a name he repeated again and again. "Nana, Nana." She didn't know what it meant, but she stayed by his side, letting him grip her hand as he fought through the worst of it. She whispered calm words and held a cup of willow bark tea to his lips again and again, until finally the fever broke. On the fourth morning, she found him awake, fully awake. He looked at her with clear eyes for the first time. Their worlds were different, but something had shifted between them. She had been the only light in his darkness. When she checked the bandage, he reached toward his chest and spoke a single word in his own language. "Kyel!" She blinked at the sound of it. Realization came slowly, then warmed her heart. "That's your name," she said softly. "Kyel." He nodded, then she touched her chest. "Rebecca." He said her name back slowly, shaping it with care. Rebecca. It was the first bridge between them. Days passed. The mud dried. The sky cleared. Kyel grew stronger, though he still favored his shoulder. They learned simple words together. He pointed to jars on the cellar shelves. "Peach," she told him. "D," he said, giving her the Apache word. They traded words in this clumsy way, both trying to understand the other. She learned he was the son of a chief. Nana was his father. The name he cried for in the fever wasn't fear, it was love. The truth hit her like a cold wind. She hadn't saved just a warrior, she had saved the son of a leader. One evening, as she kneaded dough at the table upstairs, she looked out the window and saw a wagon approaching. Her stomach twisted. Jedediah Smith. Jed had been her husband's closest friend. A decent man, a loyal man, but also a man who hated the Apache, with the silent bitterness of someone who had lost family in raids long ago. Rebecca rushed down to Kyel. "Someone is coming," she whispered urgently. "Be silent. Stay still." Kyel didn't need translation. He heard the fear in her voice. He pressed his back to the wall, ready to vanish into shadow. Rebecca scattered straw over the cellar doors and forced her heartbeat to slow. When she stepped outside, Jedediah was already pulling his wagon to a stop. "Rebecca," he called. "You all right? That storm was something fierce." She forced a smile. "I'm fine, Jed," the cabin held. But Jedediah's sharp eyes scanned the yard. He saw the signs she had missed, tracks too large to be hers, an extra plate drying by the window. His brow furrowed. "You haven't seen any Apache around here, have you?" he asked. A simple question, a deadly one. "I saw Kane's men chasing someone before the storm," she said carefully. "But no, not here." His eyes said he didn't believe her. Jedediah walked near the cellar doors. He paused. "These doors look barred from the outside," he said quietly. "That's new." Fear crawled up her spine. "The wind was beating them open," she said quickly. "I just secured them." Quote. Jedediah stared at her for a long, painful moment. The kind eyes she had trusted for years were now clouded with something else: suspicion, disappointment, and fear. Without another word, he climbed back into his wagon. "Be careful, Rebecca," he said. "There are lines you don't cross out here, not if you want to survive." He drove away, leaving her standing in a cloud of dread. He didn't know the truth, but he knew enough. The secret was out. That night, as the air cooled and the stars rose, Kyel stood in the lantern glow with something carved from wood in his hand. He had made it while resting, its shape smooth and delicate, a small hawk with outstretched wings. He held it out to her, a gift, a thank you, a farewell. "You're leaving," she said softly. He nodded. His dark eyes held sadness, respect, and something deeper. He touched his chest. "Kyel." Then he touched hers. "Rebecca." He pointed to himself, then to her, and said a word in Apache. "Shida." She didn't know the translation, but she felt its meaning in her bones. "My people." Under a moonless sky, she walked him to the edge of her land. He paused once, looking back at her, his figure blending into the land he belonged to. He raised his hand in farewell. Then he was gone. Rebecca stood holding the small hawk, her heart heavy. The silence around her was no longer empty. It was waiting, and danger was already on its way. The silence after Kyel's departure sat heavy over Rebecca's homestead. She kept the small wooden hawk close, running her thumb over its wings whenever fear crept into her chest. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. and she knew the world outside her cabin was shifting against her. It didn't take long. When she rode into the settlement of Tres Piedras a few days later, the change struck her like a blow. Neighbors who used to greet her kindly now turned away. Martha, the storekeeper's wife, pretended to be busy stacking tins. Whispers followed Rebecca down the narrow aisle of the store, cold and sharp as cactus needles. Cain's men were near her place. Jed Smith said she's been acting strange. Maybe she's helping them. Quote, they didn't know the truth, but suspicion was poison, and it spread fast. The first warning came the next morning. When Rebecca opened her front door, she froze. Hanging from her gatepost was a dead coyote, stiff and swaying in the wind. A sign dripped with dark tar below it. Indian lover. The words punched the air from her lungs. She took down the coyote with trembling hands and buried it beneath the mesquite tree. It felt like burying the last piece of safety she had left. She couldn't ignore this. She had to confront Jedediah. She rode to his ranch and found him repairing a fence. He turned when he heard her horse, his face lined with exhaustion and worry. Jed, she said, her voice tight, someone hung a coyote on my gate. They're saying, I heard, he interrupted, hammering a nail without looking at her. Cain's stirring people up. And you, she asked softly, are you? He stopped working. His shoulders sagged. Rebecca, you lied to me. I saw the signs. The tracks. The extra plate. He swallowed hard. You were hiding him. There was no use denying it. He was wounded, Jed, she said. Cain's men were hunting him for sport. He was just a boy. He was Apache, Jed snapped, his voice cracking. Do you forget what they did to my brother's family? A boy can kill just as fast as a man. Rebecca stepped closer. He was a person, Jedediah, just like you. Just like me. Jed's jaw tightened. Her words scraped at old wounds inside him. Cain's men questioned me, he said quietly. They're watching me. Watching everyone. You've put us all in danger. She felt the world tilt under her feet. Jedediah wasn't just afraid for himself, he was afraid for everyone around him. So that's it? She whispered. You turn your back on me? I can't be tied to this, he said. You made your choice. Now you live with it. Rebecca rode home alone, a weight crushing her chest. Kyle's presence in her cellar had saved his life. But it had cost her the last threads of connection to her own world. But the world she thought she had lost was about to show itself in a way she never expected. 3 figures appeared at the edge of her land late one evening. Rebecca froze on her porch, her rifle shaking in her hands. But the figures walked slowly, hands open, peaceful. Apache, one was young and strong. One was old and steady, with hair streaked in gray and a face carved by time. And the third, Rebecca's breath caught, Kyel. He was thinner, tired, but standing tall. When their eyes met, something warm flickered to life in her chest. The 3 men stopped a distance away. Kyel said something to the older warrior. The elder stepped forward and placed a bundle wrapped in deerskin on the ground. Then all 3 stepped back. Rebecca's heart pounded. She set down her rifle and walked forward with open hands. She knelt and unwrapped the bundle. A quarter of a deer, piñon nuts, medicinal herbs, a gift, payment, respect. Her throat tightened with emotion. When she looked up, Kyle's eyes were full of gratitude. But far above them, hidden on a rocky ridge, a pair of pale eyes watched. Silas Cain lowered his spyglass, a wicked smile stretching across his face. Well now, he said, we got our proof. Pike stood beside him, gripping his rifle. What do we do? Pike asked. Cain's smile grew colder. We end it. Tonight. Tell the settlement the Apache are gathering at the Mayfield place. She's one of them. We put this whole thing in the ground. The trap snapped shut. Night fell fast. Rebecca was cooking the venison the Apache had given her when the first rifle shot tore through her door. Wood splintered across the room. A second shot shattered her window. Rebecca dropped to the floor as gunfire exploded outside. Yells and curses filled the air. Cain's men had surrounded her homestead. Give it up, Mayfield! Pike shouted. Send out the savages, and maybe we let you live! She crawled to grab her Winchester, but her hands trembled. Her house was a wooden box. One spark and it could burn around her. Before she could decide what to do, a fierce cry echoed from the rocks, an Apache war cry, not of attack, of defense. Kyel, Nana, and a group of warriors rushed from the shadows, arrows and bullets cutting through the night. Chaos erupted. Kane's men staggered under the sudden assault. Rebecca crawled to a back window and fired just enough shots to throw the attackers into confusion. The battle twisted into madness. Men screamed. Horses reared. Torches flew. Smoke billowed across the dirt yard. And then Rebecca saw him, Silas Kane, charging straight at Kyel. Kyel turned too late, weakened by his healing wound. Kane raised his pistol, fury blazing in his face. This was his moment of revenge. Rebecca didn't think. She didn't breathe. She didn't hesitate. She ran. She ran through smoke and bullets and shadows. "No!" she screamed as she threw herself between them. Her body slammed against Kyel's, shielding him. She stood facing Kane, unarmed, trembling but unbroken. Kane froze, his pistol aimed at her chest. For a long moment, the entire battlefield fell silent. Even the wind held its breath. Rebecca lifted her voice, shaking with emotion but fierce as fire. "Enough! Look at what this has done. Look at what we've let hate turn us into. This land is big enough for all of us. It is peace we don't have enough of." Quote. Her words were simple, but they cut deeper than any bullet. Kane's spell of fear broke. His men lowered their rifles, ashamed. Some stepped back, others turned away. Jedediah, hidden near the barn, saw his moment. He charged forward with a heavy fence post and struck Kane in the legs. The cattle baron crashed to the ground, roaring in shock. The battle ended with that single blow. Kane's men fled. Others dropped their weapons and vanished into the dark. The yard grew quiet, except for the crackle of dying flames and the low murmur of the Apache warriors gathering in a respectful circle. Kyel rose slowly and helped Rebecca to her feet. His touch was gentle, his eyes filled with something deep and unspoken. Then Nana, the chief, stepped forward. He studied her face with solemn intensity, seeing not fear, but a heart that had stood against hatred itself. He placed his hand on her shoulder and spoke in his deep, steady voice. "Ishki Bilki." Kyel translated softly. "My father says you carry the spirit of the Creator. You shielded his son, not with iron, but with your heart. You are a bridge between our people. Our word for you is old and sacred, Mother of Peace." The words settled over her like the soft glow of dawn. Mother of Peace. Rebecca looked at Kyel, at Nana, at Jedediah standing silently nearby. At the land that had shaped her and nearly broken her, she had protected a wounded boy. She had stood between life and death. She had called for peace in a world that had forgotten the meaning of the word. And tonight, both sides had listened. From that day on, the Apache would know her by a name that spread far beyond the Dragoon Mountains, a name spoken with respect. Mother of Peace.